Absolute Superman loses everything. God, this comic is so phenomenal. So, this all starts with the fall of Krypton. Now, you guys already know the origin of Krypton, so that's not really what we're focusing on here. Instead, we initially pick up in the Redlands, right? Because Superman's parents were basically miners. And what's going on here is a cave-in. Now, this was the first indicator to Jor-El that Krypton as a planet was failing. And so as he's making his way through this mine, he ends up coming across these miners who were trapped down here. But that's when they tell him the cave-in is not the only threat they have to contend with, that they're currently being attacked by the indigenous life. Now, on the surface, it seems kind of innocuous and a little bit silly, but magmoles, there's a reason why they're doing what they're doing, because Jor-El says that's impossible. They do not tunnel this far above the planet's mantle, and they've never attacked people before. And so he says something must have disturbed the food chain, pushed them out of their natural habitat. They're scared and they're hungry. Now, where his initial response is we can't just start killing them because we're attacking us, the other miners are fighting for survival. So their whole mindset is when they show up, we kill them, no questions asked, and we do that as we make our way out of this place. And so that's where Superman kind of gives us this bit of a monologue where he says, the people of the Kryptonian countryside were used to fighting for survival against the scorching red daybreak and hard-baked soil, the gemstorms spewing diamond hailstones at hurricane speeds, the infrared famines and acid tornadoes and glacial volcanoes that would freeze entire oceans. The ruthless ruling powers of the cities, the sun-crazed beasts of the field. Every day, we battled them all. We built a place of peace and beauty in the Redlands of Krypton, but it did not come without toil and hardship, without grit and blisters, without the resolve it takes to fight for what is yours, no matter the cost. And so that's where Jor-El is effectively forced to do something that he didn't want to do, which is take up arms and kill all these magmoles. And so Superman continues on and he says, I come from generations of Kryptonians who made their way through the harshest of worlds with lava in their veins, dirt beneath their fingernails, and blood on their hands. Who am I to question my ancestors? And so following that, we pick up in Greenland, specifically with the Lazarus Corp research facility. Now, as always, we do have a playlist if you need to get caught up. Yes, the playlist is current, but this initially focuses on Superman arriving here to basically rescue Jimmy Olsen. The reason being because Jimmy Olsen, as a member of the Omegas, basically part of the resistance force that's led by Primus, whose identity we still don't necessarily know, that he was captured by Lois Lane. And while Lois Lane's loyalties are fairly ambiguous and still very much in question, at this point, it's a matter of freeing Jimmy, because Jimmy was one of Superman's ties to the idea that the world could legitimately be a good place. Almost everything outside of Jimmy Olsen is people just picking sides. Those who are in favor of Lazarus, those who are against Lazarus, and neither is willing to acknowledge the fact that they're not 100% right. Everybody just convinced themselves that their side is the right side. And so Superman just starts demolishing all these guys, right? They send out what resistance they can and what forces they can, but ultimately it doesn't really do any good. And in fact, as Jimmy Olsen is being taken through this research facility, there's of course news up there that's basically saying that the resistance is being dealt with, that Jimmy Olsen, one of the most high-profile members of the resistance, is basically being taken to a Lazarus facility. So the news being broadcast is as much to inform the public as it is to demoralize any pockets of resistance out there that are not allying directly with the Omegas themselves. Basically Elmos, right? The last men on Earth, so to speak. What's also funny about this is that Lois Lane considers reporters to be morons, right? The irony, of course, is not lost on any of you guys here. But at that point, you learn of two main things. The first is that Jimmy Olsen and Lois Lane are not as much enemy as we've been led to believe. That in some capacity, they're working together. Right now, again, we don't know the full extent of this, but seemingly she's kind of working to get Jimmy on the inside. The other thing we learn here is that Ra's al Ghul is in this location. And in fact, he's watching the actions of Superman unfold. Now, one of the things to keep in mind here is that yes, the Absolute Universe has a lot going on right now. There's Absolute Joker and his grand schemes and all that kind of stuff. What seems to be going on here is that Ra's al Ghul is kind of the overarching hidden hand, the guy behind everything, which to a degree makes sense considering the longevity of Ra's al Ghul in the main DC universe, that DC would carry that over. but again, that may not necessarily be the case. It could be that Ra's al Ghul, much like Absolute Joker, is answering to a higher power. But regardless, Absolute Brainiac is here. And where Ra's al Ghul asked the question, right, are all the pieces on the board? Has everything been arranged exactly as I described it? The response of Brainiac, yes, right, I have seen to it personally. And of course, Ra's al Ghul asks, right, he's like, you could not have chosen a less godforsaken location for such a momentous day, Brainiac. And the response of Brainiac, I've been running simulations, millions a minute, about the physiological changes one might experience when migrating from a red supergiant system like Krypton's to a yellow dwarf star's orbit. I believe Superman's absorption of solar energy to be the source of his remarkable powers. And here, the sun will not rise for another 37 days. The longer he fights, the more Superman will exhaust his solar reserves. Now keep in mind here, right, the way that Ra's al Ghul has been presented to us here over the course of the Absolute Comics line is he's kind of a showman, right? That while he himself largely remains in the shadows, that he likes to display these shows of force to the world, that Lazarus is not an organization to be trifled with. And so Lazarus defeating Superman in a very, very public place is his ideal situation. But more than that, it's just defeating Superman. And as much as he may not necessarily be a big fan of it, if Greenland presents the best location to do it, you can bet dollars to donuts he's going to launch this strike in Greenland, which is exactly what happens. Because Ra's al Ghul asked the question, right? I don't want him weakened, I want him stronger than ever. And it kind of catches Brainiac off guard, because it's like, if your goal is to defeat Superman, don't you want him, like, broken? And that's where Ra's says, such things are for weaker beings, Brainiac, like you. I want to make Superman whole. And so that's when you get the return of Christopher Smith. Now again, Peacemaker over the course of this story has been awesome, and in fact, it's one of the best depictions of his character. That initially he just started off as a member of the Peacemaker Corp, basically the paramilitary force used by Lazarus to impose their will in different places around the world. But eventually he came face to face with Superman, and that whole experience with him hating Superman, being despised by Superman, coupled with what was already mental instability, massacring a boatload of people because they basically laughed at him, that was all used by Brainiac to essentially recondition him mentally and turn him into an agent of Brainiac with enhancements operating on behalf of Ra's al Ghul. But when he approaches here, he's like, if I can speak freely, do I have permission to win this time? In Smallville, when I was about to put that illegal alien down for good, I was prevented from doing so. And that's where Brainiac says, yes, 100%, because you were given the kryptonite bullets in order to stop Superman. But that's where Ra's al Ghul says, you take your orders directly from me, Smith, and no one else. And the orders of Ra's al Ghul are to make God proud. And so where he hands him a green kryptonite bullet, there's actually something bigger going on here, and you guys will see what I'm talking about. Now, the other part of this is Superman himself. He is holding nothing back against all of these Peacemaker forces. We don't necessarily know that he's killing them, and truth to tell, given the nature of Superman, both in this Absolute universe and the main DC universe, there's no reason to believe that he actually would, because he seems to stand against the very idea of ending a life due to the permanence of it. But that's where Ra's al Ghul simply just says, our soldiers are being dragged screaming into the night. Tell me this means what I hope it means. Tell me he's killing them. But of course, that's where Brainiac says their vitals are quite active, right? Superman is merely stranding them miles away. And that's where Ra's says, then we have to encourage him, right? We have to get the guy to start killing. Begin phase 2. And that's where Primus shows up, right? Omega Men, find Agent Alpha, find Olsen, and kill anyone who gets in your way. So they are far more ruthless and far more brutal than even Absolute Superman himself, because from their perspective, kind of using the example at the beginning of the story, they're the miners fighting for survival. Superman is Jor-El taking a kinder hand throughout all of this. And so that's where Christopher Smith shows up, not necessarily to take out Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen, but to basically taunt them and say, look at what it is that I'm about to do. With all these enhancements, you are about to see the death of Superman. And so that's where Superman chimes in, and what's probably one of the greatest Superman monologues of all time, right? He says, I hear him coming. I hear the roar of his jetpack, his heart pounding in his chest. Peacemaker Smith is coming to kill me. He has a bullet in his gun that will do the job, forged from the rubble of my dead homeworld. In Smallville, he almost succeeded. He's killed before and been rewarded for it, incentivized to do it again. His enemies have been othered and dehumanized. He's the hero of his own story, and he will keep on killing unless he's stopped, which is a true statement, right? When you stop looking at your enemies as people, it's so much easier to kill them, because then you can rationalize killing them using any line of logic that you want to believe, right? White lies are lies we tell other people to make them feel good. Rationalizations are lies we tell ourselves to make ourselves feel good. And that's where Superman continues on. His armor is advanced alien technology beyond anything this planet should be capable of producing. It's been laced throughout his body in what I imagine was an extraordinarily painful procedure, one that transformed Christopher Smith into the single most powerful human on the face of the earth. But I am not human. And when they first make contact, Christopher Smith comes crashing down to Earth, and Superman's like, I beat him senseless in about 4 seconds. That will not stop him though, will it? At least not for good. With little more than a blink, I could microwave his brain, leave him a drooling invalid. With a puff of breath, I could shatter his vertebrae so he'd never walk again, never pull another trigger, or I could put my fist through his chest and hurl his heart into space with such speed that he'd still be alive to see it sailing away. I try not to think of reasons to do these things. I try. And he says, but all I hear are my father's words. And here's the crazy thing, is that in the aftermath of that whole experience in the cave, which is why we talked about it at the beginning, that Jor-El is explaining his line of logic to Kal-El, to Superman. And he says, look, I don't believe in the idea of taking life willy-nilly. Life is sacred and life is important. But understand, the moles had been driven into a mindless rage by whatever forces chased them from their homes deep within Krypton, that I should have been more prepared. And that's where Kal-El asks, right? You did the right thing. You saved those miners. And he says, the right thing? No. That's what we like to tell ourselves because it makes our tough decisions easier to live with. Out here in the Redlands, there are always tough decisions, Kal, but we must never lose sight of what constitutes cruelty and inhumanity, especially when we're the ones being cruel. And that's where Kal-El is like, but sometimes we still have to do it, right? If there's no other way, if it saves people's lives. And that's where his father says, that's what it's been like in my time and my fathers before him, his fathers too. Sometimes we have to be the cruel ones if that's what it takes to preserve all of this from going away. Sometimes to save everything, you have to be willing to lose everything, to become the bad guy. And that's a crazy thing, is because Superman says, my father was the wisest, most caring man I've ever known. I cherish every lesson he ever taught me, and every day he's been gone, I've wished we'd had more time. But my father is dead, just like my mother, along with the only world they ever knew. In the end, all they could save it was me, and I am not the miner with the lava gun. I'm the last beast in the mine. And that's where Primus steps up, and it's just like, are you not going to kill him? After everything he's done, are you really not going to kill him? And that's where the response of Ra's al Ghul, when he shows up on the scene, is, how dare you speak to him, the son of the demon? How dare you address a man of such stature with your blind rage and frustration, right? Ranting and raving like an irresponsible child, angry because he won't do what you want him to do. And so initially Lois is like, wait, you're calling him your son? And that's where Ra's is like, not by blood, of course. The blood is what comes now, boy. And that's where Christopher Smith is like, no. I thought I was the chosen one, right? I was supposed to be the son of the demon. I was supposed to be the one to lead the grand crusade of Ra's al Ghul across the world and ushering in a whole new era where Lazarus rules everything. And that's where Ra's is just like, no, right? You are a wolf in sheep's clothing, and I know that because a wolf would not be lying here quivering and broken. The reality here is you are not the man that I need you to be. And he goes to fire the killing blow on Christopher Smith, who had been sitting there complaining about the fact that he never got to fire his bullet. And where Superman initially steps in and tries to block the shot, that seemingly the bullet goes through his hand and it kills Christopher Smith. And so at that point, The response of Roz is, look at me, my son. I know what you are feeling, right? You're angry at the state of the world, a world that has treated you poorly. This anger of yours, I want you to know, it is righteous. It is my gift to you. And he says, we will use that anger, you and I, to save this planet from itself, to remake the world. Is that not what you want, my son? And that's where Superman is just like, I am not your son. And the response of Roz, perhaps not, but you will be. And that's where you realize that Primus had stabbed him through the back with a kryptonite blade. And Lois comes running up on the scene, right? And it's just like, what in the hell is going on? And then Primus takes her out. And the whole realization here is that Primus is a sleeper agent. Primus is a double agent, leading the resistance while working on behalf of Ra's al Ghul. Not only that, and here's the crazy thing, right? With Primus taking out all these other members of the Omegas, that Ross continues on and he says, you are not yet worthy of being called a child of Al Ghul, but we will teach you. And he says, your sister and I, won't we, Talia? Because Talia al Ghul is the leader of the resistance. And full transparency here, man, some of you guys called it. Some of you guys nailed it in the comment section of previous videos. Like the first video that we saw of the Omegas, some of you guys were like, that's Talia, and she's working on behalf of Roz. Dude, it's dope. I love that you guys caught that. Because I didn't catch it. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. The Absolute Universe, solid as always. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.